particular component, but I take the point. And actually, and just let me explain, Craig can probably touch a little bit on this too. I mean, the data in these things, the consistent spatial data, but also there's a huge mass of what we call tabular data, which is also useful, but we've got to be careful about what we say about that. I think we could come up with plans for integration of tabular data as well, but that's extremely technical discussion, and it's quite complicated. And in IUCN, if you aim too high too quickly, things fail. So whatever comes out of this or any other workshop you have to go to, we have to take it in chunks, small bite-sized chunks that we achieve, and then we move on to the next thing. I'm such a believer in that, because you can get so easily distracted. If you aim high, it just falls. And given that actually in IUCN culture, people don't understand what is behind something like this. You know, there's a lot of work in building the red list, and partly because Craig and Caroline and colleagues are in their home of the red list in Cambridge, you know, nobody quite sees that day-to-day effort, because, you know, in Glom, they don't meet them in the corridor. You know, there's a lot of work behind this, so we're trying to keep it simple and not too scary at first. Did you have a line there? No? Tom?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I think it's a good start. A couple of comments on it. One is that, which maybe builds on Alan's point, there's quite a lot of specific text and caveats and riders in here, and I think probably the real starting point is a super high level thing on, you know, these are data that are intended to better inform societal decision making to prevent the loss of biodiversity or something like that.
Well, you just did that. Did you get that down?
Well,
very nice.
Something along those broad general lines. Yeah, I also think there's a point missing here, which is to better reflect the fact that these are really unique community databases that draw from IUCN's power in bringing together tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people and institutions and governments who provide the data into these systems, following the processes which IUCN can uniquely organise to set standards and quality control. So I think there's that's not a purpose thing, but it is a unique piece that IUCN brings to the table in organising this, and it's probably worth reflecting something.
Thank you, Tom. That's really useful. In fact, before you came in, I had reflected a little bit on some of the sort of attributes of our data sets, but that does need to come into a statement like this. So, I mean, I can see one output from this is going to be that we're going to set up a little drafting group afterwards. Ed has a comment.
Yeah, great. This is a great starting point, and I'd love to say I agree with Tom there. Beyond us, we need a really sharp, fancy part of any paragraph on there, and then a number of things that unpack it, principles, guidelines, and it might be worth some of this at some stage. I'm not saying here now, to go through a whole theory of change type exercise, which will help us understand where we're trying to get to and what we need to do in order to get there. And that might be quite a useful exercise. It's not for this group. It's initially a smaller group to do, and then share with a wider group. The last thing I'd like to make sure we get in there, here participation, but I also would like to, we have a bullet that looks at sort of governance, local governance issues, which then links into the governance framework stuff.
Yes, I think we need to have that, embrace those two products as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
we need to embrace those. I was going to ask a question, does this vision embrace those two new?
Yes, I think it is meant to, and we don't really have that as a focus for today, but it should embrace all of those, I think.
Okay, then for us in the future, we just need to have those comments. We need to embrace wording that reflects nature dependency and governance.
Okay, well that was, as you know, Paul wrote that with that in mind. So we can make sure that's maybe a bit more explicit. In terms of theory of change, I mean, just a few, I think there's two kinds of theories of change needed. One is, you know, what is going to be the result of people using this information, what happens? And the other is, we need a sort of plan to do this. You know, what are we actually going to do? And one thing to say about the red list is that the original intentions of the red list have all changed. And all the uses that it's put to now are beyond anybody's wildest imaginings the way it was set up. So we can do that, but I think we've always got to realise that the data may be used by many more kinds of users that we never thought of. Until we throw it out there, we don't know.
Well, that's the whole issue with the theory of change. You can revise it anytime you like.
Okay, no, and I think that would be a worthwhile exercise. Tim, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself? We feel that we're a small enough group, although we're getting bigger now.
Hello, apologies to be late. Tim Lavin, I'm the director of the World Heritage Programme of IUCN based at headquarters, part of the Biodiversity Conservation Group in Germany. Do you want me to say anything more than that? Or?
No, that's wonderful.
Good for a start? Okay,
that's
thanks.
great for a start. Thank you very much for making it in the rain. Okay, any other comments on Alan? Another one?
Another thing that you've got to think about is who else can think about clay. So as it's currently working, you could say that's what GBIF does in case.
Okay, nice point, thanks.
How some of our talk about is it's authoritative, it's maintained, it's curated.
Thank you, yeah.
It involves the community, so you're not really aggregating other people's
Speak
data.
up a bit, Alan.
You're not really aggregating other people's data, which GBIF is, but membership is creating that data, maintaining it, and curating it, to give it that authoritative.
Yes. Thank you. We'll certainly think about that. Michael?
Yeah. First, I didn't want to go into the details of the text because the idea was not good words anymore.
No, but it's just great to get a few ideas.
But
Then
I think
we'll
that maybe it's not missing, but it's perhaps including what other people have said. But I think that at least, I really believe in access to data, all the data for people to do things. And I don't know how far we want to go in putting that the purpose of open access, if that's the appropriate term to have there.
that's the point.
But I think it's something of not just the overview and analysis, but also empower people to do their own analysis as well.
Yeah, that's also a nice point. So thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah. So, but we're not going to fiddle around with this text. We've got some points, and I think it's warmed us up a bit, and we can come back and see if we've got any other reflections. And certainly as an action point, we will have ask for some volunteers to come and refine this into something that we can consult on a little bit more broadly. Welcome, Rebecca. Would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks for coming.
Hello, I'm really sorry I'm late.
Don't worry.
Transport has been
Interested, yeah.
My name is Rebecca Miller. I work in the IUCN Red List unit, helping to manage and produce guides to the Red List, and also focusing on building Red List training products and supporting the network and producing Red List.
Thank you very much. So now I think we will go to our first presentation on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. Akbar has always been taken care of at the back.
Thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, everybody. Many of you would have seen many of these slides before. It's a rehash of several talks, so apologies to those of you who know all this. But I'm trying to put the emphasis on how the knowledge product has grown over the years, some of the lessons that we've learned over time into this presentation. So just to remind you all what the Red List is. So it's regarded as the world's most comprehensive information source for extinction risk of species. But as we keep stressing, it's not just a list, it's just a compilation of names and categories. It has a whole lot of other information. It was information about the ranges of the species, the habitats they found, the threats to the species, how the species are used, a whole host of different information. And it's really useful information that can be used to inform and influence biodiversity conservation on the ground. But just to stress that the actual Red List framework itself is all about measuring risk of extinction. It doesn't say what the conservation priority should be for any one particular species. And we have to always bear that in mind when we use the Red List. Now the goal of the Red List has changed just in the last year. It had a two-part goal before, now it's all been merged into one. So it's now to provide information and analyses on the status, the trends and the threats to species in order to inform and catalyze action for biodiversity conservation. Now, before, the first goal was very much focused on assessing the extinction risk of species. That's always been the traditional goal of the red list. But we now realize that the power of this data is that we can bring multiple species together and do credible analyses to really inform it and get action happening on the ground. And that's why a lot of the stress now is on the latter part of the goal, and how we can do these multiple species analyses, do the monitoring over time, and get changes in status over time across all species groups, which is then a very powerful tool for informing conservation. Just a bit on the process. So just to stress that there's a very rigorous system of criteria which we use, quantitative criteria that are used to establish what category, what risk of extinction your species gets placed into. And behind that is a whole set of rules and regulations and guidelines and very key documents that explain the whole process and give it the scientific rigor, which is really important in any knowledge product. And that's been developed over many years, involving a very wide range of scientists across the whole world. And that's a key part of the process. In developing the criteria that we have in the knowledge product, it took lots and lots of consultation worldwide, involving lots of different stakeholders. If you don't have that consultation, you don't get buy-in to the process. And we hear that in some of the other products as well. IUCN for a long time tried to do the red list by itself, and we realized it was an impossible task. We cannot possibly do it ourselves, so we've developed the red list partnership. It's a whole range of organizations. Many of our traditional biodiversity partners are also members of IUCN. We've also reached out to the academic community, bringing in some of the universities to bring in that aspect of the work, to do some of the pure research to help guide that side of the, and keep the sort of theoretical focus on the red list, keep that sharp and up to date with what the current thinking is in conservation biology. Bringing in some of these sort of people who've involved more in sort of communication, like Wildscreen, using images and species stories to communicate the message. And then bringing in some of the technological partners like Microsoft to help us with some of the technological challenges. And that's a new partner that's just been announced this week. But of course, behind all these partnerships, there are huge networks of people gathering all the data, and that's a vital part of the whole process. Having these networks of people, scientists around the world, gather the information, compile it all, and put it all, or come up with the assessments and put it all into the red list. And this is all the range of the species specialist groups that we have within ACC that contribute to the process. Just to touch a bit on governance, possibly we have too much governance in the red list, but it's all an important part of the process to have the proper oversight, due diligence, and all the sort of checks and balances in place to make sure that the whole process is a robust one, it is a challenge, and that it's seen to be completely transparent and rigorous. So we have the red unit within the Global Species Program, but there are a number of other units within the Global Species Program, the Freshwater Unit, the Marine Biodiversity Unit, who all contribute to the red list process. We have a red list committee, and all the partners are members of that committee, plus various other people representing other parts of the SSC. We have two working groups under the committee, a red list technical working group, which is there to advise on technical matters related to the application of the criteria, gathering the kinds of data we want to gather, setting various standards and so on. We also realize that red listing happens beyond the global, lower than the global scale, at a regional scale or at a national scale. And IUCN likes to provide advice and guidance to our national members as to how you go about doing red lists. So we have a national red list working group, which is co-chaired by John Paul and Dr. Bailey, to oversee that group and provide that sort of advice. We then have this green box, which is a slightly independent group called the Red List Standards and Petitions Subcommittee. They are the team that grew out of the sort of review process of developing the criteria, who are there to sort of keep a watch over the whole thing, to make sure that we're keeping the standards right, keeping track of the scientific literature, see if any new changes we need to bring into the system, and how you apply the criteria. So for example, at the moment they're grappling with issues about how we take into account the effects of climate change on extinction risk species. When the criteria were first developed, climate change wasn't on scene at all as a major threat. Now it is a huge thing, and the criteria do or don't they take into account the effects of climate change, and they operate at a very different timescales to what we use in the red list process. So that subcommittee is looking at how we integrate some thinking from the climate change work into the red list process. And they're also there to oversee any challenges. Any species on the red list that listing can be challenged by anybody in the world. If they don't agree with it, put forward a challenge based on the criteria, and if that can't be resolved with the groups, it then goes to the appeals process, which is overseen by the regular standards group, like a court, if you like, a jury. And all of this feeds through to the SEC steering committee. There's this sort of top body, then reporting back through to IUCN Council through Simon Stewart. Coming to the role of the register, it's really important these knowledge products to have a secretariat team to hold the whole thing together. So we are very much there to manage the whole process, the database, the website, the GIS data and so on. We help to develop and maintain the various standards. Do all the quality checks before we publish the information on the Reddit's website, help to process the petitions, very much involved in the development of tools and infrastructure, contribute to the production of various analyses, the Reddit's index and so on, do lots of training and facilitation of workshops, developing new courses and tools for doing training. There's been quite a lot of work about that here. There's a launch of a new online training tool happening tomorrow. Lunchtime and seasons together. With a knowledge product that's so widely used, you get bombarded by questions. Every day we receive literally hundreds of emails from all over the world. But we take questions to really serious ones. And if you have a knowledge product, you have a duty in a way to respond to those requests to those questions. And so a lot of our time is taken up responding to these various requests for data, responding to requests for questions. And of course, because the whole Redis process is gaining such momentum around the world, there are lots of national, regional Redis happening all over the place. They all want guidance from IUCN. How do we do it? So your team has to be prepared to run around the world to help provide guidance and support where we can to various national and regional processes. So that's all very important part of the having a knowledge product to provide that wider support to other groups around the world. The actual Redis assessment process, I won't go through all the details here, but let's really stress that there's a whole strong, rigorous process where how an assessment is done. There are multiple different ways of how an assessment is done. It can be within the SEC network or within the Redis partner, or it could be completely outside of the IEC networks. It then comes through a whole review process. It gets checked, quality checked, reviewed, and rechecked again, so eventually you're happy with it, and then it gets published. But it goes through several cycles to make sure that it's all correct. And I'll come back to this point about the reviewers in a moment. It says currently at least 2 reviewers for every assessment, and that's something I'll touch on a bit later. In doing the assessments, mostly assessments go through a cycle where you usually link to some sort of project, you plan the project, you train people how to do the assessment, you compile the data, do draft accounts, produce maps. Each of those steps requires quite a lot of capacity building so people know what to do. You may have a workshop where you bring all the experts together to share their knowledge and reach agreement and consensus on the assessments. It gets reviewed by the project team, submitted to the register, and then published. And the idea is that you repeat that process every 5 to 10 years if you can. And the cycle may be the same or slightly different depending on the needs of the project. It's all, we try to encourage all the people that are contributing data to do it via the central database system, the Species Information Service, which is an online tool. So it's accessible to anybody around the world that have access to the internet. We also have an offline version, so if they don't have access to online, they can do it offline and then upload it once they're finished. Also, when we go to the publication phase, it's the whole process about how you submit your assessments. It goes into a queue, various checks are run, they're then accepted for publication, and there's a set timeline for when this all happens. So we can work with all our partners, with the communications people, to try and get the stories together, get the assessments ready so they can be published in time. Then that requires quite a lot of planning, a lot of lead-in time to get those things done. That has implications in terms of workload and how often we can actually update the web list. So we try to do it at least twice a year. We've done it once 4 times a year, which almost killed all of us. But we are looking again to try and do more regular, more frequent updates of smaller taxonomic groups, discrete groups that can be pushed as soon as they're ready to go to the website. And that's really what we're trying to aim for, is as soon as the data's ready, push it, so you don't hold the data back and wait for a year or 2, because that delays any conservation action happening on the ground. So what does the red list tell us? Well, there are lots and lots of species been coming into the red list over the last 13 years, and that's an important thing with any knowledge product. You have to factor in scalability issues. As your product starts to take off and grow, you have to be able to deal with vast quantities of data. And so whatever your systems you have for the database or the website, they have to be scalable. Be able to handle the quantity of data, be able to serve it up very quickly and easily, so it can be easily retrieved by people. And I won't go into the details of all the information. Just to stress, in terms of the knowledge products, so the red list covers all those under the species, but the real importance of the red list is that it covers certain groups completely. So we've assessed all the species, or almost all the species, within a whole number of different groups on the red list. And we're trying to expand that coverage so we cover a representative sample of biodiversity across all the major ecosystems. And that's the long-term goal of the red list. Another important part is the gathering of the spatial data. That's how much spatial data is gathered over time, sort of depicted spatially, which is really, really powerful. So you can look at individual species groups, see how they patterns of richness or different richness compare across the world, combine those data sets together, come up with really hotspots for vertebrate biodiversity, which is what we did in 2010.